On this week's episode with Bill Villafranco, you're going to hear the importance of management and leadership. In fact, the benefactor of the organization he's running trained him on this. It's a bet on management and leadership. And we here at the Corley Company believe the same thing, which is why we offer executive advising services one-on-one with CEOs and executive directors to help you think through challenging situations, make better decisions, and take action. So if you're interested in this service, please reach out to Michael at thecorleycompany.com. All right, on this week's episode, I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the pleasure of interviewing Bill Villafranco. Bill is a trustee at the Virginia B. Toulmin Foundation, also executive director of MyFace.org. You heard that right. He's both an executive director and a board member, or trustee, I should say, and a fascinating trajectory into the nonprofit space. Successful in the for-profit space. So Bill, if you would, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your history, and how you got involved in philanthropy.
Love to. Really nice to meet you, Michael, and thank you so much for having me. You know, I would tell you that my history in philanthropy started as a young boy. I was always a giving son, always looking after others, and it just sort of kept going until I got married. And then unfortunately, my second child, a son, passed away. And I really poured into philanthropy at that time, perhaps for the wrong reasons. I was hiding the guilt that I was feeling about Billy's death. And I felt what would make me feel much better was to help others. And it absolutely did. It absolutely did. Until I realized after 15 years that I had lost a son, because I had truly pushed it away. And I met this wonderful woman, Virginia Toulmin. Virginia was in the midst of selling her pharmaceutical business. She has an amazing history in and of that herself. But she was in a process of a big liquidity event, and she was looking for a money manager to help her. Now, she had very strict requirements for this person or organization, and that was that she wanted someone who could travel with her, someone who she could teach her principles of management and working with nonprofits. And I was lucky in that she selected me, and I had started my own business a few years earlier, so I had plenty of time to spend and plenty of time to travel around the world with her, and that is exactly what I did. And she taught me the importance of giving to organizations that had strong management. And the missions are important, of course, for her, but it's the management that will prove successful in the end. And it was something that stood with me then and stays with me now. And when she passed in 2010, her estate plan is incredibly unique. She left a large sum of money to Georgetown University Medical Center for medical research. That's really where her money was made. She also left money to her hometown in Dayton at their community foundation. And then she left money to her private foundation. But the interesting thing about her private foundation is there's only 3 trustees and their lifetime appointments. A few weeks before she passed away, she sat me down in her kitchen and explained to me this estate plan, and more importantly, what her private foundation goals were. And it was simple. I am not going to manage this from the grave, Bill. There'll be 3 of you that'll manage this, and I'm leaving you no direction. I trust each of you, and I want you to do as I would do. And I'll never forget one of her remarks during that time together was, what good is my money if the world changes and that money can't be used for things that are needed at that time? And if you look what's happening right now with the big tax bill that was just passed and the Medicare and Medicaid cuts, we'll probably be pivoting even more to the work in the arts and within organizations that are going to be losing that help.
No, this is absolutely fantastic. So no direction whatsoever. So you've got all the flexibility in the world, a lifetime appointment. That's a heck of a responsibility.
Yeah, it is. But when you love someone as much as I loved her, she took me from those dark periods when I realized my son's death and stood by me. She stood by me through a very difficult divorce. She was a friend. And I viewed her as such. She had no children. She was married, and her husband died only after 7 years. She was to be married again, but her then to be husband died shortly before their marriage. And she's decided, I am not looking to get married ever again. And I got lucky. She chose me to be her, I call it surrogate son. And I spent an enormous amount of time with her. So it was important for me to understand what she was doing. And of the three trustees, I'm the last one left. Unfortunately, one passed away, and another decided that, he had other career ambitions. And although he cared very much for Virginia, and he takes care of her account at the Toulmin Foundation, it was just in his best interest to devote his time there. So I'm the last one that knew her. And I take that role very, very seriously.
Oh, I bet you do, because you're the key to the legacy, and then making sure that the Virginia Toulmin name continues. So talk a little bit about that. How important is it to you that people know who she is, and what are you doing to make sure, as a trustee, that that name will exist into perpetuity?
Yeah, I am very, very interested in making sure that happens. We believe that the younger generation is the key to this. Having her name on a building, she could have many buildings, nothing she ever wanted. And if she truly wanted it, she would have left it in her will and directed us to do so. But she did not. What she wanted was her name to live on in the work being done. And what she taught me was not only was management important, but Bill, you better get in there and understand who is benefiting and why do they feel they're benefiting from that. So we are incredibly active with all of our grantees. We are at camps. You'll see us at performances. You'll see us interviewing those in which they've received scholarships from. So her name and her life is being told over and over and over and over. If you go to our website, mind me do this, www.toulminfoundation.org, you'll see we have an extensive video library. And we're trying to show the impact through video so those can learn some of the things that we're learning throughout this tenure. And then finally, we have scholarships across the country in her name. We just started one here at Selby Garden, and it's a very unique scholarship. It's called the Virginia B. Toulmin Female Leadership Scholarship. And that's a scholarship that Selby Gardens offers to students in college. The interesting part about that scholarship is part of it is the winner receives 3 sessions with Jennifer. So they're getting mentored, but who I think is one of the finest CEOs in this town, 3 times a year, and the family gets to experience Selby Gardens for 1 year. Then in the second year, which is this year, the winner of that scholarship gets to sit on the selection committee for the new candidate. So now they're learning not only board skills, but they're also learning selection skills. So it's those kinds of scholarships that we think are critical to continuing her legacy. The last thing I want to talk to you about on this subject is our multi-generational philanthropic legacy vision. And I have an 89-year-old father, and I also have very young children. And it wouldn't be uncommon for you to see us at the opera together at a performance. We were just there 2 weeks ago at the youth opera performance. And the idea is that we realize at the Toulmin Foundation that the next generation may not have the same interests as their parents when their parents pass. But it's critical for the following generation to understand what they're meant to their grandparents. And if we can have that impact when the grandparents pass and the parents now are in control and they get older, perhaps the third generation will be able to bring back some of the values and those things that meant so much to the grandparents and then re-enter that area. And we find it really remarkable to be able to go as 3 generations. And we do it everywhere. And it's really remarkable. So her legacy for me and for the other 2 trustees is critical. I view her as probably one of the greatest female philanthropists in American history because she left us no direction.
Oh, and your ability to take donor intent, that's as board members, especially, for any foundation, donor intent is so important. And then for somebody who's modest and humble, say, no, don't put my name on everything. You see the value of doing so. That's important. Some people want to be very anonymous, but to be able to show how to do philanthropy is really important. It gives other people permission to do so.
We think so. We hope so. But truly, it warms my heart when I can go to a camp. I'm going to one in Houston next week, and I'll be with children that have cancer for 4 days. And, we provide grants to them. And just to see the impact that this camp has, they last year presented me with an award at the end of the camp where they had their handprints on a picture. And this 14-year-old girl came up to me and she thanked me for coming to camp and taking the time. But then she looked at me and said, Bill, you realize that some of these 14 handprints may not be here next year. And it brought all of it back to reality. We can make a difference just being present. And management loves it because they can get close to us and we can get close to them. And it just warms my heart to be able to see the work firsthand in all the different activities that we're involved in.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that is great. What a great lesson. Let me ask you this. You're trustee for this very active private foundation, but you're also an executive director. Share a little bit about that, how that came about, and then I want you to compare and contrast the two styles of leadership.
Oh, great question. I ask myself, how did this happen too? I became a donor to an organization called MyFace. It's a 71-year-old organization that works with the craniofacial community, those that were either born with or an acquired difference. They have a long-standing relationship with NYU. NYU performs the procedures, and we handle all of the psychosocial aspect that goes along with an individual with a facial difference. I got very interested in it 2 years after Virginia passed. Again, when she died, she left us no direction. So we spent almost 2 years interviewing as many people as we could to understand what was it that made her tick as far as her philanthropy. Everybody had a different perspective because she had a different relationship with everyone. So I knew from one perspective, another trustee might have a different perspective, a friend a different, and so forth. So I first started with this concept of, after we found our 3 pillars, the arts, women and youth, and then medical research, I then said to the trustees, let's go to those that we have a lot of respect for and ask them where they give. And we did. And I went to my mentor in the asset management business, and he introduced me to this organization, MyFace. I started by granting them some funds. And then over 2 years, I got very interested in what was happening on the board. They asked me to join the board. And then 5 years later, they asked me to be board chair, which I loved. I absolutely loved it. And then about 1.5 years ago, our executive director at MyFace retired. And I'll never forget the board meeting where they came to me and said, what is your plan? And I said, well, this is a board consisting of 16 of us. What's our plan? And they said, well, our plan is simple. We want you to be the interim executive director. And I looked at them and said, okay, how do I do that? And they said, we put big boundaries around you as an interim. You'll have strict reporting responsibilities. If you're interested, then it'll be an interim. And in 6 months, we'll commence a search. And I said, fine. So I went and I started really getting involved with the organization deeply. And I got involved with the community. And the stories touched me in such a way that really I never got to listen to or learn when I was a board member. It made me think, could I take my nonprofit experience that I had since Virginia died, merge it with my for-profit experience in my asset management company, and create something that was new and unique at MyFace, even though it was a 71-year-old organization? And I explained to the board, we had just gone through our strategic plan, so I knew it better than other board members because I was in every single meeting. And I said, I want to work on this strategic plan, but I want to do it a little differently. I want to engage the community as our research. I want to understand, what are we missing? What are we doing well? What could we do that we're not doing? And really work with the community to learn. And the board was behind me. I went in, I changed our systems around. Our systems were not talking to each other, which you hear all so frequently in nonprofit world. Your finance system is not talking to your grant management system. That's not talking to your program system. So I hired a technology company to merge it all together. I have probably one of the most extensive dashboard systems in a nonprofit, and it's beautiful. I can look up a program. I can see how many participants. I can look at the history of the program. I can see who hasn't been back to that program. I can start making phone calls saying why. So really engaging the community. But I think the most unique thing I did was I started an ambassador program. And that ambassador program consists of 9 individuals from the age 18 to 35 that have a lived experience, because they understand what it's like. And I've heard many times in the beginning, Bill, you have no idea what this is like. And my answer to them is, you're right. So tell me what I don't know so that we can think about how we get to the place you think we need to get to. So I've been executive director now for over a year. They extended my term for 6 more months. So now it's 12 months. And they're starting a search. And they asked me if I would be interested in participating in the search. And I said, of course. And I commend the board for their leadership in looking at this, saying, we said we were going to do this. Bill, you have other businesses. I know you're doing a great job, but we need to do this because we have to look after people's money. And so we're in the middle of a search right now, and I hope I get it, but we'll see. But the difference I'm seeing is it's incredibly difficult to be an executive director, regardless of the environment out there. It could be a great environment. The stock market's going straight up. Everyone has plenty of money and they're willing to give it. Or an environment like now where, the real estate market's a little tighter, interest rates are higher, people are worrying, and it's hard. But either way, the executive director job is really difficult. And here I am as board chair. Now there's a new board chair who is someone I respect very much, who's been on the board a long time. We have a great relationship. So all of those things that we talk about in nonprofit world, ED has to have a good relationship with it was already there. Now it's just a little bit more amplified. But it's interesting because the board has a different view of me now, where before I was someone who ran the organization from a board level to now I report to 17 people. And it's a total different look. And, I have my asset management company. It's mine. I founded it, and I have no one to report to but my clients. Now I have 17 people, and I'm going, wow, this is not fun. And, when you send an email out to 17 because you're ecstatic about something that happened in the community and you want to share, and there's crickets in return. And you're saying, oh my God, are they not happy? Are they happy? What are they thinking? So it's all of that goes into being an executive director. That's a very difficult position. And honestly, Michael, I never realized it. I thought, pretty easy. You're running an organization, pretty easy. Throw in staff, throw in what the staff wants, and now complicate it like I did with these ambassadors that have a real say on what they want. And then you go back to your team and say, okay, this is what the ambassadors want. And they look at you and one will say, we can't raise any money for that. It's not going to work. And another one saying, it's a great program. I know they want it. And now I'm looking at this saying, we have to do it. We have to figure this out. So I'll tell you one program we started that the board looked at me like I was crazy. And it was a fireside chat series where I would bring in someone who has a disability and we would have a conversation over lunch. And, we brought 2 people in from our community. One, Patrick Hardison, firefighter from the South that was fighting a fire. And the roof fell in on the home and burned his face off. And he had a facial transplant 11 years ago. And his story is remarkable. We had a great response for the board. This is great. It's right what we should be doing. Terrific. The next one I brought in was a woman by the name of Paige Billiot and Selena Lee. Selena has a birthmark on her face, fairly significant, and she's an incredible artist. Paige is a big advocate for birthmarks as well, and she's out there advocating for birthmarks. Again, the board said, great. Then I brought in Allie Stroker. And if you don't know Allie, Allie was the first female to win a Tony on Broadway in a wheelchair. And I brought in her father. And the talk was all about what was it like for a dad to have a daughter with a disability. And how was it for you, Allie? You were 2 years old when you were paralyzed from the shoulders down in a car accident. What was it like for you growing up? Because the anxiety and the depression and the bullying that you felt is known in our community too. Well, the board ended up agreeing that it was terrific, and we sold it out. And again, being a board member, a former board member, you think you know how they're going to react because you're in the ED seat now. So it's a very difficult transition. It's one I love. The board is terrific, but yet it comes with this idea that you have to perform, and you have ideas on how you want to perform, and you want the board to agree with you, and sometimes they don't, and the results aren't what either you thought, they're what the board thought, or vice versa, and you have to realize, what does that actually mean? So there's a lot of that is very different, and I have so much respect for executive directors out there that I didn't have before.
Well, I imagine this podcast is going to be forwarded by every executive director to their board members. Please empathize, please sympathize, listen to what Bill's saying. And you are so right. I was chuckling as you were giving a master class on the challenges. And Reed and I often joke, board members are the 17 people, the 17 bosses that don't show up to work every day, but they're gonna give you their opinion. And you as executive director have got to really balance that. How will you be a better board member going forward, having lived this experience as an executive director?
So one of the differences between me and many other executive directors that I've gotten to know is executive directors do not allow board members to speak to staff. Excuse me, the other way. Executive directors do not want board members to speak to staff. Correct. Because they feel, there's risk there. I'm totally the opposite. I want the board members to speak to staff because they're going to learn. And that's much of the disconnect with many boards and the programming side. They're hearing from one person. And a lot of times they're hearing a summary of what's happened rather than what's actually boots on the ground happening. And the boots on the ground happening will make board members better board members. And therefore, better decisions will happen at the board level because it's not one person telling their story or interpretation of their story. It's the open dialogue between board members. So it's made me a better trustee for Virginia, knowing some of the things that I now know about the role of an executive director. I can ask different questions from a different way. It's no longer probing. It's, hey, I lived in your shoes. I get it. Let's talk about how we can be a better partner with you. Maybe funds that you wouldn't want to tell us about you need, but you really need it. It's much more of that dialogue that I think is critical for board members to have. And it comes with great risk for the executive director. And I totally understand that and appreciate that. But I think that their job would be easier if they would allow that dialogue to happen.
Yeah, this is great advice. And as we're starting to wind down a little bit, so as a board member, what would you hope, as board members are listening to this, what would you like them to know about being an executive director that they may not know?
The pressures are great. They want to perform well for you. They want to ensure the mission is being upheld. And they also want to make sure the community appreciates and understands what their needs are, and that they're creating programs to the best of their ability. But at times, there's going to be conflict. And one, as an executive director, has to be a master at figuring out how to solve that conflict. And that's not easy. And as a board member, I would say, if you can just take a pause before making decisions and try to understand where the executive director is coming from, in a deeper fashion, where are they getting their research? Where are they getting their concepts? And not be too judgmental too quickly, because it takes time to develop programs. And sometimes we're just so bent on looking at data that the other side of it doesn't have an opportunity to come through. And that's where involvement by board members at the organization's events is critical, and not just the gala.
Yeah, that's very well stated. And so I'm going to ask you a somewhat related question. So there are people listening to this maybe considering, they're business people, asset managers, just like yourself, hard charging, we're trying to make it, and they've got an opportunity to serve on a board, a nonprofit board. What advice would you give them?
Get to know the mission, and perhaps the greatest advice I could give you is get to know leadership before you decide to sit on that board. Virginia taught me the importance of those two things, but the first, get to know the leadership before you decide, because it could be a great mission, but without a cohesive relationship with leadership, it's really going to be a rough road to hoe.
Boy, that is great advice. So last question, Bill, and this has been a masterclass in on-board leadership and an executive director and the dynamics of that relationship. What else would you like to share with our listeners? Any pieces of advice as we end this interview?
Yeah, I think in all that we do, there could be great impact on our own lives. And it could be as simple walking down the street in the morning to say hello to someone, to something much more drastic where you can be a leader on a board, a donor. Think of those that we're serving and the lives that they live, and try your hardest to be part of it. Whatever that means, be part of it. It's truly important as we think of where we all want our legacies to land when we're no longer here.
Bill Villafranco, cannot thank you enough for coming on today. Trustee for the Virginia B. Toulmin Foundation, and also Executive Director for MyFace.org. My Lord, two roles. And he does have a day job, ladies and gentlemen. Bill, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Michael. It was terrific to meet you, and it was really appreciative. I appreciate it very much that I have an opportunity to be here.
All right, recapping with Reed, ladies and gentlemen. Reed, we just had a great talk with Bill Villafranco. I mean, there are more than 3 takeaways, but we're going to wind it down to 3, or limit it to 3, your top 3. What say you?
Yep. To be honest, I got so caught up in all those stories that I was not taking very detailed notes, but I do have 3 takeaways. So the first one, a very unique approach to Bill's leadership as the executive director of MyFace. He actually wants the board members to speak to staff. We hear a lot about keeping that separation. He has a little bit different approach to that. I think that is unique.
Yeah, very good. Number 2.
Something that he wants board members to know about being an executive director, now that he's sat in both seats, is that the pressures are really high. You have a lot of stakeholders. You have beneficiaries that are relying on your services. There's a lot of people to satisfy as that executive director. So board members, be aware of that. Your executive director is dealing with a lot of outside forces.
Very good. And number 3.
Advice for for-profit people about to serve on a board or think about serving on a nonprofit board. Before you do that, get to know the mission and get to know the leadership before you make that commitment.
Well, for not taking notes, you came up with 3 really good ones. There we are, ladies and gentlemen, recapping with Reed, and we will I-501 see you next week.